Hi there, I'm Stacy, the encaustic mixed media artist behind Studio Stacy. This week I am working on a couple top secret paintings. So since I can't show you those, I thought it would be fun to show you instead some paintings that I don't think I've ever shown on social media. I definitely haven't shown them on this channel. And also I thought it would be fun to talk about different substrates or different things that you can paint on with encaustic paint. You have seen me work on, for the most part, wood cradled panels, which is what this painting is on. A wood cradled panel is exactly what it sounds like. It's a panel that is framed or cradled with wood. They work great for encaustic. There are, however, so many other things that you can paint on with encaustic. The biggest thing you have to remember is it has to be a porous surface. So no plastic, no metal, no treated woods or treated papers, no acrylic painted papers or acrylic painted canvases, anything like that. But everything else, really anything that is porous, the sky is the limit with encaustic. Paper is a great substrate to paint on with encaustic. That's what this is, just paper. And you can see it has, the encaustic has seeped through the back, but it's not hurting anything, it's not hurting the paper, it's just a porous material, and it's a thinner porous material, so the encaustic tends to seep through it. The upside to painting on paper is it is readily available and usually pretty inexpensive. You can use whatever kind of paper, just make sure it's not coated. But there's a couple downsides. One of the downsides is that paper is a flexible material. So I think you can see here, this has actually cracked because the paper flexed and this cracked along that line there where the paper flexed. So in order to prevent this, I would go ahead and highly encourage you to paint on paper. You get some fantastic results. But I would either then mount it to a hard wood surface, or you could simply put it in a frame and it would work wonderfully. Another disadvantage to working with paper is that it is, of course, a flammable, thin surface. So you have to be really careful when using a torch with it because you can catch it on fire. Another thing to keep in mind when painting on paper with encaustic is that encaustic makes the paper transparent. So I don't know if you, hopefully you can pick that up in the video there, but this piece of paper is now transparent and you can see right through to the book that's underneath. You can really use this towards your advantage and really get some beautiful layering techniques going on in using various different papers. And when you mount this paper, you could actually see the wood grain on whatever wood you're using or whatever surface you're using. Here is some eco printed paper, and you can apply encaustic to this in a book form and it would be beautiful. I mean, you don't have to use eco printed paper either. You could use whatever paper you wanted to and make little mini or large encaustic paper books. I wanted to talk briefly about some non-traditional art materials, such as cardboard. Again, anything that is porous you can use with encaustic paint, and cardboard is definitely porous. Here's an example of some corrugated cardboard. And this I mounted to, again, a wood cradled panel, but you don't have to do that. You could just paint directly onto the cardboard and leave it as is. Now, if you really wanted to add some dimension to this, some even more dimension, you could stack several layers of this cardboard together and really just play up the layers, leave some blank areas, or you could really, really build it up and have it as a freeform sculpture type of material. Here's another example of encaustic on cardboard. This time it just happens to be in the shape of a heart. But you can see I build up a lot of layers there. And then of course I have some crochet on here as well, which that will bring me to my next point. But cardboard can be a great surface. And again, if you wanted to hang this, all you would have to do, I would do this before you put encaustic on it, but you could drill through a couple holes in the cardboard and put some hanger on it, either wire or ribbon. You could also take and glue on the back of this, because this is pretty light depending on how heavy material you were working with, glue one of those sawtooth hangers on and simply just hang it on your wall with that. Lots and lots of ideas. The options really are endless. Speaking of crochet, you want to make sure that you use a cotton or natural fiber. Don't use acrylic, because acrylic has plastic in it and eventually the encaustic could possibly chip off of it. Also, you could use wool, but the problem with wool is it shrinks. So it would be a fun experiment, I think, and someday I plan on doing that. But at any rate, this is cotton thread that I crocheted a little doily with. And I have these air plant pods, which I'll pop a picture in here. But all of these pods were made from crocheted circles or doilies, mini little doilies, and I applied wax to them. You can really see there's the stitching in there, and then added various different things over the top of each one. This was a 100-day project from several 100-day projects ago, but these are really fun little things, and you don't have to, make them into little sculptures, but you can see it's a hard thing now. It's no longer soft and pliable like this is once you add the wax to it. Several layers of wax, of course. Another non-traditional substrate for encaustic is fabric. Here's a piece of fabric that has encaustic wax applied to just the center of it, but it's muslin that I freeformed crocheted around. And here is what I ended up doing with those freeform crocheted pieces of fabric. Again, you want to use an all-natural fabric like cotton or muslin. Things like that work perfectly with the encaustic. Here's another example of that freeform fabric and encaustic, and this time I collaged it with a piece of paper underneath it and showing through. Fabric has very similar properties when you mix it with the wax, encaustic wax, that paper does, in that it becomes see-through. Hopefully you can see that there, but this fabric is quite see-through, which again could be a beautiful thing. The other really lovely thing about fabric and encaustic is that you can sew into it, and hopefully you can see that, but it leaves these little tiny holes if you sew into it after you've put the wax on, or you can sew into it prior to putting the wax on and you don't get any holes. It also remains quite pliable and bendable as long as you don't put too much wax on. I also like to use some non-traditional products like paper clay and paper mache materials. This is a product called stone clay. You can also get paper clay, and it air dries, so you can just form it into any shape you want, and you can carve into it when it's wet and make all kinds of wonderful textures and punch holes in it, all kinds of lovely stuff. And this takes encaustic really well. Here is one that I've applied encaustic to, and you can see it still keeps all that lovely texture, and it's beautiful. Now if I had punched a hole into this prior to letting the clay dry, I could have hung it, made an ornament or anything. You can also just mount these to encaustic panels that you've made. They mount really well because it's very lightweight. Here's a piece of art that I have framed, but I'm going to try to zoom in and get you a little bit of a close-up. Basically, this is the paper mache material that I mounted and applied it while it was wet to a piece of burlap, and then encaustic paint is over it, but you can see it really picks up some beautiful texture in there. Items found in nature or natural items like flower petals. This one actually has some wax on it. Pine cones, even twigs, branches work wonderfully with encaustic because, again, they're a porous material. Here's a painting that I've done where I incorporated a flower that I dipped in the encaustic wax. Now, you don't have to mount these to a panel. If you really wanted to make a sculptural element out of these, you could definitely do that. The thing with these flower petals is they're a little bit fragile, but once you get the wax on them, they become actually pretty hard and a little bit less fragile. Now, the thin flower petals are definitely more fragile, but again, I encourage you to experiment around, and I would really love to see what you come up with. Here's another example of a natural material. That was one of these that I dipped into the encaustic wax, and then I embedded this onto a piece of mat board. I did an entire series, an entire 100 paintings on mat board, just plain old mat board that I had lying around left over from various other projects. So again, I encourage you to experiment and mess around with what you have on hand. Just make sure it's a porous material. I encourage you to also check out that 100-day project that I did. I will link it up there somewhere. I experimented a lot with a lot of different materials, so check that out, and I would also love to know if you experiment around with any of these materials, what you think. I hope that was helpful to those of you aspiring to be encaustic artists, and for those of you not aspiring to be an encaustic artist, I hope that encouraged you to at least go out and try something new anyways. If you did like this, I would really appreciate it if you gave the video a great big thumbs up. If you have any questions, like I said, leave them down below in the comment section. I'm happy to answer anything and everything that I possibly can. If you aren't subscribed and would consider doing so, I would also very much appreciate that. And if you are subscribed but aren't getting notified every time I release a new video, which is usually on Tuesdays, hit that bell down there and that will notify you. Again, thanks so much for coming along. We'll talk to you soon, and bye for now.